Welcome back to Full Throttle, powered by Race for RP. And obviously, one of our huge goals with this program is to help raise awareness and education and be able to maybe help fund some research for the cure to Race for RP and relapsing polychondritis. And that means every once in a while, we are going to talk with some of the researchers and doctors that are deeply involved in that program. And recently at Indianapolis Motor Speedway, I had the chance to sit down with Rashmi Kanagal-Shamanna, and she is a cancer researcher that works for the MD Anderson Cancer Center, but she is working with some of the researchers that are working on autoimmune disease and on relapsing polychondritis and taking that research in a very different, outside of the box direction.
The story is so fascinating. You work in the MD Anderson Cancer Center at the University of Texas. It's a cancer research facility and program, and yet we're hearing that you're doing some cutting edge work on autoimmune diseases, and relapsing polychondritis will certainly be a benefactor of that. How did that connection develop?
Right, so that's a great question. So we are now aware that relapsing polychondritis and other autoimmune disorder, patients that are affected by these disorders have abnormalities in the bone marrow. So when I'm a hematopathologist, so I look at the cells under a microscope, and when I see that, I see morphologically, but I can visually see these abnormalities. And so these patients, eventually about 20% of them go on to develop blood cancers or bone marrow, which arise from the bone marrow. So essentially bone marrow cancers. And looking at it from my end, from the cancer end, the diseases of bone marrow, especially the one I'm studying, that's myelodysplastic syndrome, about a quarter of these cases have abnormalities. It have an immune inflammatory background. And it is still, there's a lot of effort that's put into it, but we are still unclear how this inflammation leads to abnormalities of the bone marrow, right? So I think that's where we see the connection with the recent discovery that Dr. Beck has shown that the UBA1 mutations in a specific subtype of RP, the VEXAS syndrome, has connected this link, showing that both these may be two ends of the same spectrum of autoimmune disorder leading up to clonal hematopoiesis that leads on to myelodysplastic syndrome. And I think this is fascinating because it's providing us the window of opportunity where if we are able to identify what is this connection, number one, in addition to identifying the root cause for some of the RP patients, we are able to kind of prevent these patients from developing future bone marrow diseases, right? I mean, we can improve the quality of life. We can prevent them from developing anemia, which is what tires them, and prevent them from getting cancer.
So you're saying there's a link between you get inflammation, cartilage inflammation that can then get into the bone marrow, and that can then evolve or mutate into this form of cancer.
Yes.
And so you take it and you backtrack it, you go from the cancer end back through to find out the root causes, and that can help autoimmune sufferers.
And to support that, it's amazing that, I mean, all this, the UBA1 essentially, it's not even been 2 years since we know about it. It's fascinating that the cancer community has accepted this to be within the spectrum of bone marrow diseases. So essentially, I think it was just 2 weeks back, we had two standardized classification schemes that come out every few years or so, the WHO classification and the International Consensus classification. Both the classifications have independently incorporated VEXAS in diseases of bone marrow, and that shows how much impact this specific research question would have for community of patients with both autoimmune disorders as well as cancer. And
so VEXAS, real quick, for those that are familiar with it, that is a form of autoimmune disorder,
yes,
essentially?
It is an adult onset multi-system autoimmune inflammatory disorder, but the specific thing is the presence of UBA1 mutations, and typically these patients also have abnormalities. What we see are vacuoles within the myeloid and the white blood cells and the red blood cells. So the vacuoles are also typical, but not in all.
So is that UBA1, is that what you would call a biomarker? Is that
Yes.
okay?
It's a diagnostic marker, biomarker, exactly.
One of the challenges I know for treating RP and other autoimmune diseases is, one, you have a lot of patients that don't even know they have it. And so trying to get samples is a huge thing. And I know that there's been some big steps recently in terms of biobanks. That's so crucial for research, isn't it? Because that's where you get the actual physical material that you can start to test, isn't it?
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's where I think the role of MD Anderson comes in. We've been, not necessarily for VEXs, for any blood cancers, we've been proactively banking all of the specimens, I believe, for the last 10 to 15 years. And now all we need to do is screen for UBA1 mutations and go back to those cells and analyze them further. And we know a significant proportion of them also have cancer. So that's the gold mine right there.
Yeah. I'm curious, I believe you first got trained as an MD, as a doctor, then you obviously went the research route. What drew you to that? I'm curious.
I think working at MD Anderson, it's a cancer center, the biggest cancer center, and they foster research, creativity, innovation, and collaboration, and the support that we have, the encouragement that we have for research is amazing. And I've been lucky because I think with the RP Foundation, whose objective is kind of aligned to exactly what I'm interested in, and their support for research. And they were the first one, they kind of saw the value of this link between autoimmune and the blood cancers. And they were, I think, pivotal in bringing me and Dr. David Beck together, connecting us so we can kind of brainstorm and work it through. And I think work me at MD Anderson and with David Beck at New York, it's just going to be a great collaboration. And we've been working at this for a few months now, and I can honestly say he's one of the smartest, brilliant scientists, and I look forward to discussions every week when we have our scheduled meetings.
Well, they say two minds are greater than one, and I would think two great minds are way better than one mind. So that's fascinating to me. In going through some of your history, you've won numerous awards. You've been published many, many times over. Obviously, there's been lots of things that have happened for you. What's one of the most exciting things that, as you've been going through your research, whether it's RP or otherwise, that you've just had an aha moment that has just really startled you and got you on a new path, for instance?
Yeah. So I have like close to 200 publications now, and I started it all as a trainee at MD Anderson. And the very first paper, when it got accepted, it is not a great paper. It's just a small series of patients with a very rare disorder. That's my first year as a fellow. A few years later, I collected more, performed multi-institutional studies, and built on it. And 2 weeks ago, the international consensus has recognized that as a provisional entity, and I cannot believe it. It started out with one case of bone marrow from a patient that I saw, and in the last 10 years how it's evolved. And I think VEXs, RP, they're all rare disorders, but doesn't mean we dismiss them, because they will probably provide us the clue to the much broader pathways that might be implicated in many more diseases.
And I love the reverse engineering, part of it. When you see that connection, you go, well, let's start here and go backwards and find maybe that'll give us those critical things. Obviously, you've been dealing with the RP Foundation, but this seems, I think, might be your first experience at a racetrack with Race for RP, which is a wonderfully novel approach to use the passion of motorsports that fans have, that competitors have, to try and raise awareness and education and ultimately funding for what you do. I believe a guy named Didier Taze gave you a couple of laps this morning around the Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
Oh, yeah.
How was that?
That was amazing. Once in a lifetime experience. So this is my first time.
Yeah.
And I got to do a hot lap with him, so that it was fantastic. I was a bit jittery at first. The track was a bit damp, but then he took me around, and before I knew it, I asked him, "Are we done? Can we go for another one?" So it's been an awesome experience. So the one thing I saw, something that was that I learned is how much passion the drivers have at this race, the fans, and the physics that go behind, the mechanics that go behind, the engineering, the efforts of so many people that are behind each driver, and the level of commitment. I kind of see the same, that's, it's similar to what we do in research.
Sure.
Everything is teamwork, and I give my expertise as a hematopathologist and a molecular pathologist. David brings in his genetic expertise, and that's how it works. I think we are on the right path, and I believe we're going to make strides.
Well, and I think, Race for RP, that program obviously helps create the opportunity to have the funding and everything necessary for you. And that's one of the things that I love about the Race for RP deal, because obviously what you do is science. And racing is science, physics. It's a different branch,
yes.
But science is science.
Yes.
And I think having that blending is really insightful, and I think can be incredibly productive. And it leaves, I think, people with a lot of optimism about where this can go, and how we can help people that are suffering from multiple different types of disorders. Obviously, relapsing polychondritis.
I couldn't agree more. So even in the medical field that just starts out with biological sciences, but we are doing all sophisticated sequencing now for this project too. So that brings in molecular biology and bioinformatics to analyze those mutations, and then in pathology that I'm doing, AI is now the in thing.
Yeah.
It's the physics, it's all merged. It's all science. Everything, it's the same thing.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, it is absolutely fascinating. The work you're doing is extraordinary on so many levels, and I think it's an absolute treat for us to have you here this weekend, let you see what happens at the racetrack, have the Race for RP experience, get a ride with one of the greatest sports car drivers ever, in my opinion, and the smile on your face tells me that you are enjoying it.
Yes, I am. I also want to, once again, I couldn't have even had the opportunity to pursue this without the support from RP Foundation, the patients, the patient advocates, and my institution to provide the resources and collaboration with David.
Yeah, an opportunity to truly do some good in the world. Thank you so much, Rashmi, for taking the time to come and join us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, Greg.
All right.